Thanks so much. Hi, guys.
Thank you.
There's winging it and there's winging it. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is James, and I'm the founder of Bridge of Hope Careers, and I was born lucky.
And my name's Chance, and I'm the partner support manager for Bridge of Hope. And unlike James, I was born unlucky.
And we work for a social impact business. And our claim to fame, if you can call it that, is that most of us have been locked up. In my case, in a psychiatric ward just outside New York.
And in my case, a prison in Brixton and a mental hospital in Hackney.
So we're going to take you through our rather different personal journeys and how it all came together to the Bridge of Hope. So starting with myself. So I said I was born lucky. To be honest, that was a massive understatement. I was born exceptionally lucky and highly privileged. I had an idyllic childhood in Cambridge, and at age 13, I was sent away to the world's most famous/infamous boarding school. There, I was in the same class as a boy called Cameron, who went on to run the country. I was 2 years below this great big polar bear of a boy, never caught his last name, everybody called him Boris, who went on to run the country into the ground. Yes, and in case you're wondering, I was a little bit older than Kamikaze, who took that run the country into the ground to a whole new level. But I am apologetic in saying I was in the same group as a boy called Jacob, the minister for the 17th century. The shame knows no bounds. So after Eton, I went to Edinburgh, and then I went into a corporate career. My luck continued. I worked for the largest pub company in the world, and then moved on to Diageo, the world's biggest premium drinks company. And by 2008, I was in a senior role at Diageo, running all their biggest customers in North America. I was happily married. I had 3 kids, huge great mansion, and a swimming pool. What could possibly go wrong? Well, quite a lot. In fact, pretty well anything. So first of all, I was made redundant for the first time. And then over the next 6 or 7 years, any that could happen did happen. I was swindled. I was sued. I was swindled again. I was made redundant 5 times. And we had a massive property crash. It all unraveled rather scarily, to the point where the money completely and utterly ran out. I'd maxed out my credit cards, savings had gone, everything had either been taken or spent trying to keep my head above water. And there was one fateful day where I had to go and do the shopping for my family of 5, 3 teenage kids. And the only money I could rustle together was $5.41. And that was in the back of the car seat, in the back seat. I was lucky enough to find that. So I had to make a decision. What do? Do I buy a loaf of bread and a jar of Nutella? Or do I buy some cereal and some milk? And so those of you who are parents know we're hardwired to feed your kids. And suddenly, I couldn't do that most basic of parental tasks. And my wiring snapped. Over the next 3 weeks, I was completely unable to operate. I couldn't turn on a computer, I couldn't get in a car. I lost 3.5 stone. And I was taken to a doctor who was a psychiatrist, who listened and then turned around to me and said, "You are to be sectioned for the foreseeable future," which was unquestionably the most scary sentence I'd ever heard in my life. Within 30 seconds, a large guy, a linebacker, walked in with a wheelchair. I had to sit in the wheelchair. I was handcuffed to the wheelchair and taken up to the psychiatric ward on the 7th floor. So I don't know if you've been in a psychiatric ward. Probably best stay away from it if you can. It certainly wasn't on TripAdvisor. And it's, to be honest, not dissimilar to a hospital. But there are 3 fairly fundamental differences. First of all, the door. You ain't getting out of that door for love or money, trust me. It had the biggest lock you've ever seen in your life. Secondly, there were no curtains, no pictures, no shower curtains anywhere. It took me a couple of days to work out why that was. And then finally, it also had incredibly thick glass windows. You're probably wondering, okay, how do you know that? Well, I was on the 7th floor when one of my fellow inmates decided to throw himself out of the window and bounced. And he came back in, thank God. So, fortunately, my brother and my uncle came out and did an intervention. And it was decided that I was going to come back to the UK to recover. Everybody thought it was a terrific idea. I didn't get a vote. I came back, and that's when I was diagnosed with bipolar, which frankly I didn't even know what the hell it was at the time. And then over the next couple of weeks, my life completely and utterly unraveled. My marriage went, my kids went, my home went, everything I owned went, and obviously my career went. And so I had to kind of rebalance myself, and I needed to get a job. But my doctor said, you can't do a job that involves any kind of thinking. Your brain is totally traumatized. So I was like, okay, don't worry, I can go and work in a pub. But they wouldn't give me a job. I was like, well, I'll try a coffee shop. They wouldn't give me a job. I'll try any bloody job. None of them would give me a job. I was completely and utterly unemployable. And having been white, male, and exceptionally privileged, whether I never even knew there were such things as barriers to employment, suddenly I was unemployable. Fortunately, there was one place that didn't give a monkeys about my mental health or my CV. It was a frozen food factory down the road, and they said, if you can get up at 3 in the morning, if you're happy to work at minus 55 degrees and hack ice off the roof, you got a job. So of course I was, and I did it for a year. I was the only non-Eastern European doing that particular job, and it was quite cold. And the health and safety instructions was very simple. If your eyelids close, get the hell out of there, because that's hypothermia, and you're going to die very quickly. Otherwise, there was no health and safety instructions. So I did that for a year, clawed then my way back into the drinks industry. Got a lucky break. And then all the way through to 2018, I started climbing my way back up the greasy ladder again, until one day, when they got a new COO, and I was like, you're expensive, we can get 2 24-year-olds to do the same job, and I was made redundant for the final time. And that's when I sat on a wall in Islington, London, of a church. And I had my personal epiphany moment. Come to Jesus, call it what you like, but something had definitely happened. And somebody was saying, look, mate, what the hell are you not listening to? Do you want to carry on flogging legal drugs for the rest of your life? Or are you actually going to do something meaningful? And I knew the answer was obviously the latter. And I was like, okay, but what am I going to do? I thought, well, I'll try and help other people with barriers to employment. So I started trying to work out, okay, how the hell do I do this? And I rang up all these charities and thought, well, I'm going to deal with people, start with the charities. And let's find out what they do about employment. And I rang up 35 different charities who helped people get back on their feet. Those people could have been in prison, they could have been veterans, refugees, ex-offenders, pick your poison. And I asked the CEO of all of them, what do you do? And they all said exactly the same thing. We pick people up, they had a crap time, or they have a condition, we help them back on their feet, and we get them job ready. Every single one. Didn't matter what type of people they were helping. And I said, well, that's brilliant. What do you do when you've got them job ready? And that's when the awkward silence happened. Well, you know the tumbleweed you get in those movies? There was a lot of tumbleweed. And I'm like, this is kind of bonkers. You've got all these people who are now back on their feet. They've been helped by world-class organizations. But the one thing they need to get back in society, we all know that, is a job, and nobody was helping them. And even back in 2018, all these organizations were screaming and saying, we can't find the bloody people, and also we'd like to be more diverse and inclusive, and they were struggling on both fronts. So hence, we created the Bridge of Hope to connect those two groups. Fairly simple idea. We trialed it for a couple of years as a charity. It worked well, but it wasn't terribly scalable. And then COVID came along. That was rather scary. We had 6 weeks to live. So we said, okay, let's rethink this. and make it a digital platform. So we went back to the charities and said, look, okay, you can now help your candidates into all sorts of jobs through our digital platform. And it's free to you, and it's free to your candidates. But there's 3 conditions we ask of you, one of which is they've got to be job ready. Your words, not mine. Secondly, we don't care if they've had a tumble in life. We'll help them, but if they're a jerk, keep them out. And finally, if they need any help, that's your bag. You guys are the experts. You do the duty of care the whole way through the program and once they've got a job. And if that works for you, we're in. The good news was they all said, we're in. And we're now nearly 2 years after that, and we hoped we might have a couple of thousand people on our platform. That would have been pretty cool. But we got 79,000. So we work with about 100 charities. Most of them you'll have heard of, Crisis, Walking with the Wounded, et cetera, We work with a ton of social enterprises, non-Russell Group unis, and people who go, well, hey, I have a barrier to employment. I'm a mum returning to work. I've been in prison. I'm mental health, whatever it might be. And everybody's welcome. But, and you guys are talent acquisition people. This is not oven-ready talent. Using the delightful Maui mentioned earlier. They may have a gap in their CV. They may have a condition, etc. But the research proves, and CIPD and also business and community have done research, and they said, okay, let's compare the 2 groups. Typical, not typical, whatever you want to call them, marginalized, untapped talent, we call them. On every metric, untapped talent wins. Primarily, works harder. Secondly, stays longer. And finally, is actually great for your reputation. So I'm like, okay, we've got something here. We've got an idea. And I started talking to people and said, anybody who's doing this really well? And not surprisingly, I was told, go and have a chat with Timpson's. So I went to talk to the guys at Timpson's, and James Timpson, he's like, if you're interested, go and see what's happening in one of our prisons. They were training people in prisons around cobbling. I was incredibly impressed. And I said, what happens at the end? They complete the qualification, they get a job offer in a Timpson. I'm like, well, that's brilliant. And I knew something like 15% of their candidates came through the prisons. And he said, yeah, it's great. And so I said, can you help me with one nagging doubt? Because I'm going to be having to sell this to all sorts of people. What about the awkward elephant in the room? The trust thing. And he said, oh, that's simple. I said, well, how does that work? He goes, well, what we do is as soon as they come in, they get a job. On the first day, anybody who comes through that program, they're given the takings and told, go take it to Barclays. And some of them look rather askew, and they're like, I was an armed robber. Or, yeah, I did a large fraud. Are you sure you want to give me them? And the answer was, hurry up. Barclays closes in 15 minutes. And nobody's gone away with the takings. So I thought, okay, so I was very impressed, but I was told, you've got to talk to one other company who are really brilliant at this, but nobody's heard of. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. Who are they? I was told, it's called Recycling Lives. And I'm like, well, what do they do? And they do recycling. Simple. TV and fridges. So I went all the way up to Preston to meet these guys. And I said, what do you do? And they go, we do recycling. TVs and fridges. I said, well, I know that. But why am I being told to come all the way up to Preston to talk to you? And so anyway, they're like, well, we have an interesting model. And I said, well, what's your model? They said, well, we started just doing recycling in Preston. That went pretty well. Then we went to Northwest. That went very well. Then we went national. We made a lot of money. So we thought we wanted to give back. And I said, what do you do? He said, we set up a foundation. I said, to do what? He said, we hadn't a clue. We just decided to set the foundation up and then worry about it later. So then they worked out what they were going to do was they're going to go and find people in Preston and help them back on their feet. And if that worked well, they'd give them a job. So I said, well, okay, that's absolutely brilliant. And it did go well, and they created an amazing program. So I said to him, well, what were the biggest benefits of this program? He goes, well, there were 3. He said, in ascending order, first of all, they worked way harder than all the other people who were working with us. He said, so I said, I know, productivity, we've read that. He said, yeah, but it wasn't just them. Everybody else worked harder because they had to keep up with them. I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty cool. What was the second one? He goes, we don't have a word called retention in our business. Nobody leaves. He said, because this is the glue, because certainly they never leave because we've just changed their lives entirely, but everybody else just suddenly feels much more embedded into an organization because of that. I'm like, okay, wow. How the hell do you top those 2? And he said, well, this is the one I'm a bit embarrassed about. I said, well, don't be embarrassed. It's just between us. I promise you not to tell anybody about it. And he said, we never lose a pitch. I said, I don't understand. What do you mean you never lose a pitch? He said, well, when we do a pitch, it's always a blind pitch. And I said, okay, how does that work? And he said, well, everybody else says it's going to cost £100 per ton or £199 per ton. We just say 5 tons, 2 homeless people, 10 tons, 4 homeless people, etc., etc. We win every time. I'm like, that's genius. I said, and what's your pricing? He goes, oh, we're much more expensive than everybody else. So that was the model. And that was our supply side. And it was growing fast, but we realized there was one fundamental flaw. We were overly reliant on third parties bringing their candidates to us, charities, social enterprises, etc. And we didn't want to be overly reliant on that. So I was like, okay, we need to talk to people who can help us find people rather than just rely on them coming to us. And I said, anybody got good ideas? So I asked the IHR network, and the answer was, you got to go and talk to the Adway guys. Where are the Adway guys? Over there. The purple Prosecco guys. I know the purple Prosecco guys, but I have no idea what the hell they do. But I like them. And the answer is they go find the passive candidates. In case you haven't heard, absolutely brilliant. Go and find the candidates that are not looking for a job and then encourage them to get a job. I'm like, well, that's genius. But it becomes even more genius when you're talking about the talent pools we're talking about. Because if you're autistic, you have a 16% chance of getting a job. So you ain't out there on the bloody job boards. You've probably given up. Or if you're an ex-offender, 84% of you are still looking for a job after a year. So how many of them have probably given up going, well, I've tried every time, and by the time we get to the end, they find out I was in prison, I get kicked out again. I've just had enough. So we can go to them now, working with the Adway guys, attract them, bring them in and say, here's a platform for you, the odds are in your favor, and we've got all these clients. So that's the supply side. On the demand side, pretty simple. We just work with large blue-chip corporates who are serious about this. We want to make sure the candidates go to a really good home. You don't have to be perfect at D&I, you don't have to have all of it sorted out. You just have good culture and be serious about that. And so we're very fortunate. We're now 15 months worth of trading. We've got 35 blue chip organizations we're partnering already. And I say partnering, not clients. We don't do transactions. We're here to help. And so a typical partnership is unlimited job posting, unlimited candidate sourcing, and then we boost a particular talent pool you might want or a geography working with Adway. And it's a partnership. And one of the key things you might be thinking there is like, okay, I quite like the idea of what they're talking about, and you haven't even heard the main act, but I'm not sure I can get this through the big boys in my organization, or the finance guy's not going to want to know about this. And that's where we're offering and saying, look, use us as a resource. For anybody here, please take us up on the offer. We will do a webinar free of charge to anybody you want, whether it's your key stakeholders, your TA, or your bosses who manage the money. Our job, our mission is to change hearts and minds and get people go, this is the right thing to do. And every webinar we've ever done, the management team have gone, it's not a question of if we do it, it's how quickly and how hard, and let's make it happen. So we can all win from that. So that's an open invitation. And so you've heard my story. And as I said, I'm the warm-up act. I'm now going to hand you over to Chance, who's got a much more interesting story to tell. But also he's going to tell you a little bit about how we help our candidates on their journey to improve the odds of getting to organizations like you and actually sticking. Why is that important? Because a job is quite simply the biggest game changer in life. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Cheers. Thank you, everyone, for having me. So, my story, a little bit different from James in my start to life. I was born into a family where my dad didn't think I was his. And so I experienced quite a lot of physical abuse as a child. The first being before I was 1 year old, which left me with what I thought were birthmarks until I was 21, when my mum told me exactly what had happened. And so I didn't feel significant at home at all. In fact, I ran away a couple of times and finally stayed away from it. And I met some friends, and those friends made me feel significant. They made me feel loved. But the byproduct of that was they was from the antisocial membership, and it was only going to be a matter of time before I got into trouble. And I did. By the time I was 16, I ended up in prison. By the time I was 18, my sister took me to a mental hospital because the depression was too much. The trauma had really taken its toll. And I went around chasing my tail, trying to make some changes, and ended up getting more involved in this world of badness. And just as an example, I remember it went so deep that I found myself at one point sat on a chair in a room with a group of people around me, one of which had a gun to my head. And they were asking me all sorts of questions and telling me to tell them where this person was and where that person was. And I just decided that I didn't want to tell them anything. In fact, I don't know why it wasn't about being loyal to them, it was just about now sort of being loyal to myself for some strange reason. I remember sitting there and them asking me these questions, and I remember the television was on across the other side of the room, and it was Sesame Street. And I looked and I thought, look at that. Imagine the last two people I'm going to see. It's Bert and Ernie. And it made me smile in this space of darkness. And so they pulled the trigger. But nothing happened. And maybe it just wasn't my time. And after a while, I just thought, this is just too much, all of this. And I tried to get away. And you can't. It's like you wasn't allowed to. And fast forward, my sister, who was my rock, she died. She died of cancer. And I didn't want to talk about it because then that would make it real, which is the worst possible thing you can do. Because within a year, my life unraveled, and I ended up back inside one last time. But this time I asked myself this question. I said, do you like who you are? Do you like who you've become? And the answer was worse than no. I'd had enough. I thought, if this was going to be my life, and this was going to be who I was, I didn't see the point in having one. And so at that point, I was ready to end it all. I genuinely was considering just taking my own life. And so I was left with these choices. And they were to either not live or change. And so I threw everything and the kitchen sink and the neighbour's kitchen sink at change, and spent 3 years and 10 months in therapy almost every day to unlock some pain and to deal with those childhood traumas, while spending 5 years studying with the Open University to give myself an education my childhood didn't afford to me. And then swaves of personal development programs. And then this beautiful day came upon me where I was filled with ebullience, and the warm, warm tears of joy just came flooding down my face. And it was because for the first time in my entire life, I felt freedom. No more emotional discombobulation, no more anger. I was filled with forgiveness and topped to the brim with self-respect. And I realized two things had happened. One, my childhood experiences were no longer going to define my future. And two, I finally became the person I was always meant to be. And that was the day that I decided whatever work I'm doing, I want it to be supporting people who had similar backgrounds, similar upbringings, people who faced barriers, system-impacted people. And I went on, I started my journey whilst away and started to mentor lots of young men. I had the blueprint for change. I married some of the components of therapy with business studies, so I'd get young men to look at their network in the form of assets and liabilities. And I got them to write all their names of their friends down on these pieces of paper and we put them on two sides as if they were scales. And so all your liabilities go this side, your assets go on that side. And bless them, there were one or two who said, no, this guy's definitely an asset. And I said, why? And he said, he's the guy that I can get 2 kilos from. And I'm like, is this the same guy that can take your mum's son away from her, or take your daughter's dad away? Is this the same guy you're talking to? He was like, actually, yeah, liability. And then they started pushing all the rest across. And then I had a chance to explain to them that your influences are most heaviest with the majority in your life. And if your majority are liabilities, it's a no wonder why you keep drifting back in this area. All your opportunities in your life come from your network. And if this is your network, no wonder you're picking up all these negative opportunities. And they get to see their network in a different way, and they begin to change. And I wanted to do more. I looked at the way the prison was running, and I wanted to change the environment, because the environment was not conducive to rehabilitative culture. And so I joined the Rehabilitative Culture Committee and became the chairman of the Prison Council, and joined the Prison Policy Network and started to work with the Prison Reform Trust to change how they'd done things. And it was very successful. I met some incredible charities and made some incredible friends, and was introduced to James Fellows, who became a friend. And we were friends for about 18 months. He guided me through setting up my own business, a health-specific business at the time. And all the time saying, come over to Bridge of Hope and look what we're doing and stuff. And I'm so busy, James. I'm really trying to get this thing off the ground. In the end, I said, let me come over and have a look. And I came over and I had a look at Bridge of Hope. And for me, it was like an invitation to heaven. Because I was supporting people who'd come into contact with the criminal justice system, but now I can support veterans, people with neurodiversities, people with different abilities, women returners, the whole lot. And I said, this is fantastic, James. It's a wonderful pathway where candidates can go across this bridge towards employers who are looking for them. I said, but I don't think it's good enough. He said, why? I said, because that candidate journey needs to be supportive and nourishing every step of the way, not just when they're in employment, but before. And James agreed immediately, and on that very same day, we created what we called a coalition of skills and support partners, so that the candidates can access support on that journey into employment. And just as an example, if we have candidates who are ambivalent, unsure of what they want to do, they can tap some details in about their personality. It's gamified, so it's fun. But it gives them back a list of industries their personality is transferable to, and that opens their minds up to so much more possibilities. We negotiate a partnership with the City and Guilds so that they can access free qualifications, whether it be in tech or construction or whatever it is they want. And then our sister charity put together a tech boot camp, which was fantastic, so they can access that as well. We've got some pathways into hospitality and trade. But there were two that were really, really important. And that was the financial support. So our candidates can access their wages before payday. So once an employer signs up, if a candidate's worked 2 weeks, they can access 2 weeks' wages, not 3. Why this was important is because it doesn't matter who you are. When you go into a new job, you're out of your comfort zone. If you're experiencing social anxieties and things like this, or you've been out of the labour market too long, or you're experiencing sort of imposter syndromes and things like this, and a utility bill comes in whilst you're trying to work your month in hand, it will raise anxiety and so forth. But now our candidate can pick a week out of the 2 weeks they've worked, pick a bit of that wage up, pay that bill, and just carry on down the good path. And we didn't stop there. We created another stall on the bridge where our candidates can access free financial advice. And it didn't stop there. The financial advice extends to the whole family. And the reason why this was important is because if you're the one in your family who just got a degree, it's not just you that got a degree. The whole family just got a degree. Everyone wants to be a part of it. You've even got a couple of cousins celebrating who you don't even talk to much. And what happens is you become the recommendation for everyone in your family and wider family's financial problems. So if anyone's in trouble, they say, Chance will help you. We'll ring him now. And what happens is, I know it's a privilege to be able to support your family and friends, but it's also a real pressure on these first-in-family graduates that we have. We work with 25 non-Russell Group universities. So now, when cousin Terry says, I'm in trouble, I need help, myself and the candidates can now say, absolutely, we can help. I'll signpost you to these guys. They will create a clear pathway for you to get out your financial troubles. And I've tried them myself. You'll be fine. And they have been. And so now that reduces that pressure from the candidate in that family. And these are some of the things that a lot of people don't think about. They think, yes, we want some first-in-family grads, but no one thinks about the pressure on that first-in-family grad from the whole family. And so that's what we think about. We think about ways of creating this wonderful, clear pathway for our candidates to give the best versions of themselves in the same way that I've had the opportunity to do myself. Thank you. Cheers.